Okay, good.
Welcome everybody to this Risk and Assurance Committee meeting, and Your Worship, would you like to open the prayer, please?
Almighty God, as members of the Rangitikei District Council, we give thanks for all of the good things of our district and the advantages we enjoy. We pray that you will give us wisdom and guidance as we conduct the affairs of this meeting. We pray for all the communities in the district we represent. Help us to be fair and honest in our discussions, and help us to work together in unity for the welfare of all your people. Amen.
Right. Do we have any apologies? No apologies, no public forum. Any conflict of interest that need to be declared for decisions on the meeting? None. Now, in terms of confirmation of the order of business, I would propose we move items 11 to follow immediately after item 6. But don't do item 6, I tend to forget about it. I tend to get grumpy for missing that. And then item 8, the Chair's report, I think I might conclude with that. And for members' interest, I was on a Zoom call with Wairau immediately before this meeting. They've got a special council meeting, and while it's in public excluded, there are potentially, Mr. Chief Executive, some lessons learned there that I think would be useful to talk about. Maybe I'll bring those into the agenda as we go, but that was sort of some of my comments I want to bring as part of my Chair's report. So go to first item 6.1. Confirmation of the minutes held 16th of November, doesn't seem that long ago. Can I have a mover? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. So now we move to item 11.1, page 86, Treasury Report.
Talk it through it,
Sorry, yep.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think the committee will remember that our last standing item on the agenda is a Treasury report that looks at current Treasury matters, i.e. debt levels and interest, and how we sit within the borrowing covenants. And the last committee meeting said we should also be looking towards the unknown future as to how we might be sitting regarding the ratios after three waters, bearing in mind there's an awful lot of uncertainty and a lot of notional figures put in, really more for sensitivity analysis purposes as opposed to predictions, just to see how sensitive our future debt levels may be after three waters reforms. And we're getting more information every week really as to how the debt settlement may occur, may arise. For the committee's interest, we're pretty close with DIA about where our June 2022 debt would be, or figure is. All parties are comfortable with that. So unlike other councils where they're still having a lot of negotiations around the starting point, we've got a fairly black and white starting point. So what's not known, of course, will be the June 24 debt, because we won't know that until July 24 probably. So what this paper does, it's not designed, as I say, to be a prediction. It's just to show how tight could we be expected to be within the various ratios. And like most, I'll get it back. So you can see that 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3, based on these figures, there's a fair amount of headroom in future debt levels compared to the parameters. And 3.4 is the one which is tightest for us, and that's currently the situation too. This ratio is the ratio that was used in our long-term plan to give us a current debt capacity of 91 million. As you can see, it's not an instinctively obvious ratio to use, but it's used by LGFA. And on these basis, it shows that that's the tightest one. So this is the one we'll be keeping a closer eye on as things move forward. Bear in mind, future interest rates are unknown, future debt requirements are currently unknown, and what's become apparent is the current talking is that we can expect to get the first 20 million of our Three Waters debt paid overnight in June, July 24, and the rest of it will be drip fed almost over a period of 5 years, subject to our financing requirements.
Thanks for that, Dave. Do you want to just explain that just to elected members? Because I'll just talk about my understanding. My understanding, if your net total water debt as agreed with DIA / the transition unit is less than 20 million, you'll get that paid out in one lump sum. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is if your debt is greater than 20 million for the Three Waters, then your debt will not be repaid on 1 July, but as your debt falls due, they will actually make the debt repayment. They will also, I believe, pay your interest costs as they fall due. So what is your crystal ball, Dave, in terms of what debt do you anticipate being related to the Three Waters on the 30th of June 2024?
Right. I can't give you a spot figure.
That's what I'm saying, your crystal ball.
My crystal ball is, we know the June 24 figure was, for argument's sake, 22, maybe 25. We know this year's annual plan has got a Three Waters related capex of around, say, 20 mil. And we know the draft annual plan for next year has got Three Waters capital capex increase in debt of roughly 20 mil. Now, this year's annual plan and next year's annual plan does include some carry forward. So some numbers are included in both annual plans. So my best guess at this stage would be somewhere between 35 and 45 mil. But there's so many unknowns there, yeah.
Do you want to comment on what number you've used in the draft annual plan?
Draft annual plan, we're using a figure of 40. Midpoint of them two figures, but it says quite clearly in the blurb surrounding that it's largely a notional figure. It's not an estimate. It's not a prediction. There's too many unknowns to say this is where we think we'll end up.
Yeah. So just correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding, you won't get the initial 20 million because you're over the 20 million. So that to me is actually a serious risk for council breaching its LGA covenants.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because they have said, or if I may, they have said what they don't pay us out can be shown on our balance sheet as a receivable. Now, as to how LGFA will include that in this equation of 3.4 is yet to be decided.
Could I make a comment if I may? We met with the DIA, Councillor Dalgety, myself, Chief Executive and Mayor and Finance. My indication from that meeting was, as indicated from Mr. Toombs, that it was 20 million with the balance at a later one. So have you had something that says that it's different?
My understanding is the legislation is still in bill stage until that is actually then, until it's actually finalised. We've got no degree of certainty. You know, I'm saying, now, when I'm looking at these figures, I'm the worst pessimist you can find, because it hopefully will be better. But if that's the worst case scenario, plan for the worst and hope for the best. But to me, there is all sorts of conflicting information. Now, my biggest uncertainty is that the Prime Minister has said he's going to review the timing of Three Waters, or words to that effect. What does he actually mean by that? Is it going to get pushed out a year? I mean, my personal view is there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done this calendar year. It needs to be all nailed really by December. And the amount of uncertainty and work to do, I don't think that's achievable. So there will be probably more of a transition rather than a direct, everything gets transferred on 1 July 2024. You might have had some more intel.
I think you're both absolutely correct. So DIA gave us the indication that they would transfer 20 mil.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. that hasn't passed the legal test of Crown yet. You're absolutely correct that there have been questions raised by the Minister to suggest that there will be a reform of timelines. I suspect that my own personal view is that the stormwater is likely to be removed. I would think that they may also have, again, my personal view, that they may also have a look at the rural water schemes as well, because they're incredibly contentious for the scale of the size of the problem. However, we're still waiting on those review times, and they've also suggested that they would entertain possibly some alliances between councils. What that means, nobody knows. But I'd also suggest that it's not December that's the crunch. It's actually an election in October.
I concur with you on the election. However, my concern is with the election, if there was a change in government, and I'm not saying there won't be, but if there was, it would actually take a couple of months for that the legislation literally to be unpicked and go through the parliamentary process. So to me is you've got government officials who will still rely on the existing legislation and still carry on with. So to me, the whole thing's it's a fast flowing river. Excuse the analogy. Yeah.
Chair, and in that time frame, we have to develop an LTP. So we have to develop an option A and option B LTP.
Yep.
There are a number of senior people within the transition unit talking about the difficulty of the timeframes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Dave.
If I may just change the subject, just go back to that 20 million cap. Whilst it's not been finalised yet, I would just point out that, okay, it will cause us some difficulties, but for some councils, having 20 million paid is nothing.
Oh.
It's like, why bother? You know, they've got hundreds and hundreds of millions of debt. They're only going to get 20 of it.
I totally agree, right? And I'm pleased I don't act for any of those councils now. No?
As a new councillor, I've come in and been quite concerned about the debt levels and what's been forecast for the council. And at 3.3, if our debt level went up to 77 million, we'd be outside that figure of 175 must not exceed. In our consultation document and the annual plan coming up, we have a debt level sort of into $110 million. And I'm struggling to understand the risk involved with debt.
Yeah, the graph, if I may, the graph you're referring to, Council, there'll be an amended version coming out today which shows what the figures would be without the Three Waters debt in there. So you're right, the graph that we sent out in draft includes the Three Waters related debt. Once you take that out, it becomes obviously right down.
Through the chair, you're absolutely right. It should be concerning to anybody in terms of any debt. However, first of all, the self-imposed debt limit that council has set or did set was a very conservative figure against a number of councils. So that is a self-imposed limit. The projected debt in our draft annual plan is on the position that we have to show that everything that we are proposing that could be in there is. That's why I've had it amended over the last few days to reflect that rather than an LTP position, so that we get some realisation of that debt position.
so it's clear as mud. And any more comments? Because what I'm actually proposing, and I'd like to move what's recommended, that the Treasury reporting be received, noting the significant uncertainty over the future of the Three Water debt. Because I think it's really important that we say this is actually, there's significant uncertainty there. So I move that the Treasury reporting be received, noting the significant uncertainty over the treatment of the Three Waters debt. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mayor Andy. Yep. You can call me Mr. Phillip. Sorry. No, I'm happy to call Mr. Phillip. I try to do that quietly. All right. Any further discussion on that resolution? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Next item is 11.2. Annual report update. Talking 21-22.
Just trying to find my page, excuse me, Chair.
Page 107.
Yes, I think it's a fairly brief report, and you might not have met Gerard, our new financial manager. Have you?
No, I haven't.
Chairman Phil Jones, Gerard Rue just joined us in January to take over the financial management, and he's been overseeing the annual report finalisation. We've addressed all the audit queries that have been thrown at us. We're very much now waiting for them to come back and give us the final approval for our annual report 21-22. Which we are intending to take to the March Council meeting. There's no indication that there's any issues with any of our figures or the content of the annual report at this stage. I think the delay may be in the other side of the fence having resources to tick their boxes. And once this is signed off, we look forward to having our interim for this financial year, which has yet to be scheduled.
Okay, couple of questions. Have we seen the letter of engagement for this current year?
I don't believe so. No.
Who's the director?
Chris Webb is the audit partner.
Right, okay, thank you.
And just on that, if I may,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
just by overseeing various emails within the sector, it's become clear that the audits of local governments are either performed in-house by Audit NZ or outsourced to accounting firms. Almost every council that I've seen that has an external accounting firm doing this year's audit has scheduled an interim. I don't believe Audit NZ have scheduled too many this financial year, their clients. So we're not an outlier, it's just the nature of the beast.
Mayor Andy.
So Audit New Zealand have gone out and said quite publicly that they are running under incredible pressure, and that there'll be a number of councils that don't get their audited returns until September.
September?
It's been an indication that's been given more talked about.
No, we spoke to the auditors, and we are both parties are aiming towards March.
Through you, Chair, just on that subject, which is I thought that was happening right here and right now, we're within the statutory timeframes, or we're outside of, and if we are outside of, is there an action required that comes to council to acknowledge that we're outside of those statutory timeframes?
The answer is technically you are outside of the timeframes. The issue is that the penalty is that it's mentioned in your audit opinion, and the audit opinions that I have seen for those that are actually outside the auditor actually says that's our fault, not the council's fault. You also get mentioned in dispatches to the Office of the Auditor General's report to Parliament that you have been out, you actually didn't adopt by the statutory timeframe, which was extended to 31st of December. They also will put their hand up again and say that was our fault. What the auditor provides, not the council's fault.
That is my understanding. I just wondered if we needed to take a step either through this process or for council to acknowledge that we've done everything that we can anywhere along the line, or is it just accepted that that's where it's at?
I think it's, well, the issue is the auditor will actually acknowledge formally that it's their lack of resources that have caused the breach. And if they're doing that, I don't think there's any need for council. You're lucky you're finishing 22. I'm working on a 2021 one as we speak.
Thank you.
A lot of post-balance sheet events.
Yeah, let's not go. Let's not go there. Right. But again, it's this is very disappointing because not only that, this committee and like committees rely on the management letter to actually gain assurance that all is well within the finance team. Two is it actually ties up the chief executive's finance team for an inordinate amount of time in which they should be doing other things. So to me, there's a double whammy.
I might just point out something following on from that, Chair. Section 2.2, I don't want to sit here and pretend that we haven't caused some of these delays. We did have issues with getting external drinking water standards audited. We found that I think like every council, we had to go and get an external contractor to come in and do this. They got swamped, and as our time frames got pushed out, then they slowed down the processing of our review. And we did have issues recreating some of the statement of service performance measures that did also contribute to the delay. So I don't want to sit there and say it was all the auditors. It was us as well having to take longer to prepare some of the information.
Thank you for that. Any other comments, questions?
Just your comment around the letter of engagement, that's quite important because it is a substantial cost, and that the cost analysis forms part of that letter of engagement.
Yes.
And drops into our annual plan and our PPs.
So do you want to follow that up with the director? Thank you. We've got a recommendation there. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Fee.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. All those carried. Next item, insurance update.
Thank you, and if I may talk to the paper.
Absolutely.
So section 2 is just an update on year-to-date insurance claims, very much similar to last committee update. There's been no further incidences. But I think more importantly, because there is not much in section 2, is section 3. And I'd just like to emphasise some of the initiatives we're undertaking here, that we are, once the annual report's finalised, we're going to start undertaking an insurance strategy. So rather than just roll over last year's renewals and deductibles, we're actually going to get Aon up here, and the intent is to have workshops with councillors as required and with officers as required to really develop a strategy as opposed to just roll over policies. So I think that's an important aspect to the planning for this calendar year. And you can see there's some of the things we will be discussing as part of the insurance strategy.
Thanks for that, Dave. Do you want to talk about the little Aon Day in Wellington and some of the key, and save me then doing it as part of my chair's report?
Okay.
We can bounce off each other.
Yep, so section 3.2 talks about some of the issues, well, not issues. There was an Aon risk insurance workshop 2 weeks ago where they invited members of the sector to Wellington for a day's workshop. More than happy to share some of the presentations that have been sent out. They are very interesting. And they're talking about cyber security. In 5 years' time, you might not be able to get it. To what extent do we start self-insuring? Oversee the domestic insurance market's pretty much at capacity, so that's forcing some of the insurance to go offshore, which is more expensive than domestic. So all of this stuff led us to the obvious conclusion that we do need to develop an insurance strategy.
Yeah, and I think this was after the floods in Hawke's Bay, and they were predicting a hardening of the market, which means prices are going up before at the end of January. So who knows what floods are actually going to mean. And one of the key issues, and it's highlighted in the paper, that flood mapping and understanding potential floods in terms of insurance risk is actually going to be vital and there's a national flood map being produced, which will help inform the community and insurance.
So if I'm on that, I've already asked our emergency response manager to catch up to go through our flood mapping, and pages 110 and 111 of the agenda actually summarise Aon's key points of their workshop. And I think there's some stuff in almost all of them points that are relevant to us as a council. If I may, I think what was disappointing was the number of local councils that are actually there.
That weren't there?
That were there. There wasn't many of us.
There was, of course, you're aware there were 3 others. There's one in Christchurch and Hamilton as well.
Yeah, true.
Chair, if I could just acknowledge Mr. Toombs there and say thank you for attending that, because it is a subject that we have had quite a bit of discussion around our council table with regards to some of our costs and understanding the insurance and what we get and what we don't, and I think the key word is self-insure. So I would look forward to seeing some more detailed work on that strategy, because I think it's an area that's going to take some looking into, particularly when you're relating to risk, which is the meeting that we're attending here.
Yeah. And also, Mr. Toombs, in terms of maybe we could schedule one of those workshops around with Aon around a risk insurance meeting, or travel through the area would be potentially useful.
Yeah, but I'm thinking it'll be at least a half day.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think the issue that I got out of it, well, I've known this for a long time, but was reinforced, it's called good data, good data, good data. Good asset information, good risk analysis, good hazard analysis will actually help you with the insurance company, because while, as Dave has talked about, we're now going offshore entities don't have that information. So if you can go to the insurer and say, look, we have identified our hazards and this is what we're trying to do to mitigate it, they are actually more likely to take your policy on than someone who actually hasn't got a clue. So I think that's probably, and it's worth probably spending some money, I don't know how much, right, and actually going through that process. But I think the insurance market across New Zealand, whatever you're in, whether you're in private, commercial, or an entity such as this, you're going to see a significant changing of the insurers' habits. Crystal, yep.
If I may, we do have some flood mapping. I'm just thinking about Marton, for example, because we've had the spatial plan and there's some maps there regarding flooding. And there's potential subdivision areas within floodplains. Does council have a risk if they rezone that land for subdivision?
Yes, thank you, Peter, and through you, Mr. Chair. It's a great question, and it's something that we are working on. So what normally happens in all councils, we look at different catchments, we do LiDAR of the entire catchment, and then we determine where the flood levels actually sit in big floods. So we started that journey about a year ago. We also bought quite a lot of equipment, so we don't have to go out to the market. It's really expensive if you get other people to do that for you. So we bought our own equipment, we plan to do it in-house, and what we end up then is a very accurate map of flood levels. So what happens is you can actually approve dwellings in flooded areas as long as the floor levels are safe and as long as you have access to them under flood conditions, and you note those things on the title. So there's different ways of doing it that will mitigate our own risk. But I think what's important in the message is that councillors are confident that we are aware that we need these things and we are working on them. It just takes a bit of time to get to the final product. But yeah, it is in progress.
I can actually show you a picture of a house that was built probably in the last 2 years at Waihi Beach that was flooded over with part of the cyclone hail, and there was no damage to that house. It was actually designed to be flooded. But I think the issue there is, unfortunately, they couldn't get in or out of their house, which was probably a little bit problematic, and I think there's a for sale sign on that house now. But yes, so you can, and council approved it because the floor level is, where are we? I think 2 metres above the flood level. So, Mayor Andy, you had a
And you just have to bear in mind as to who is suffering the risk here as well.
yes.
So the risk of a house being flooded, the damage to that house doesn't sit with council, but we have an advocacy role in terms of informing and making sure that the people purchasing or building that house understands their risk.
Yes.
We have significant risk around our infrastructure that is underneath it or servicing it too. And our biggest risk is really eroding risk. And that's a risk that's jointly shared between ourselves and Waka Kotahi as part of Waka Kotahi. So those analyses go on, and it's going to be a very far-reaching discussion over the next year, with literally roads that will not be replaced. But that's where our biggest single risk is.
I just concur on that. The issue is that I think we're going to, that organisation is actually going to run out of money to actually repair its own state highways.
Going to or has?
Well, they haven't actually done the numbers yet. My guess is, and I'm aware of, that there are no roads. That just as the Mayor has said, there will be no subsidy available. So if the council or the community want it, it'll be at their 100% cost. So, the world is rapidly changing. Any other questions on this paper or any related issues on insurance? Thank you. Can I have a mover for the recommendation?
Happy to receive.
Thank you. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Everything's carried. Right. So we now jump back to 7.1 on page 13. The first one's still in progress and we just talked about it. The next one is closed, thank you, Sharon. And the next three are in progress. Any comments on those? So we've got no questions, we've got a recommendation that the report follow-up actions from the risk and assurance meeting be received. I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fee. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. I'm going to leave the chairperson's report to the end. Next one is...
Chair, may I just throw a small technicality there, and I could be wrong here, and correct me if I am. Under the confirmation of minutes, Councillor Loudon has seconded. I don't know that he can as a non-member of this committee. Are you a member of this committee? Because you're not listed on the membership at the top. You're only listed in it, so that might just, I'm just looking to seek that clarity there.
Yep.
Okay. Apologies, sorry.
So if it was a workshop, you'd be giving one of your crunchies back. Right. Thank you. So on 9.1, health and safety and wellbeing report. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, and I would like to talk to the report a little bit. And I'd really like to begin by introducing and welcoming Matt Gordon to the committee. So Matt commenced with us in January as our new health, safety and wellbeing advisor. So it's really great to have him on board, and certainly a lot of the progress that you're seeing discussed in this report is a result of us having Matt's skills and capability on board, so welcome Matt. In terms of the report, I will take it as read, but there are a few key points that I'd like to draw your attention to. Firstly, in relation to the health, safety and wellbeing dashboards, you'll see we have 4 months worth of data across 3 dashboards, noting that the December and January dashboard is combined. The most commonly reported event and near miss category that you'll see across that period are slip, trip, fall and abusive behaviour, and noting that there were no notifiable incidents, so nothing notified to WorkSafe during that period. In terms of the health, safety and wellbeing due diligence plan, so this is our governance due diligence plan, you'll note that the previous plan has been completed. A new plan for 2022 to 23 has been drafted, and that includes the future health, safety and wellbeing activities and reporting structures, which are designed to support governance with their due diligence obligations. So that draft plan is attached for this committee's feedback and endorsement. We've also previously informed this committee of the best practice case study opportunity that we were offered, and that was to contribute to a better governance report that was produced by the New Zealand Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum, the Institute of Directors and WorkSafe New Zealand. So fantastic opportunity to share some of the work that's been done in terms of our due diligence plan, and a particular focus on the work is done sessions that were offered as part of that plan. At the time of writing this agenda item, the report hadn't actually been published, so a copy of the case study that I provided was included with the agenda. The report actually came out this week, so that's now published. It's a really excellent report with some good recommendations that are going to be discussed further by a working party, so really some good options in there. There's a webinar tomorrow which I'll be attending to find out a bit more about next steps. I've also included some highlights from our health, safety and wellbeing program. You'll see that there's been a whole lot of progress made, which is a direct result of Matt starting with us, which is fantastic. I'm happy to take any questions about the report or feedback on the due diligence plan.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Draghiti, I see your name in the report. Can you comment on that?
As a supposed champion, I just think it's all kudos to the management team here to be recognised in this way, and yeah, thank you Sharon and Matt for your efforts. I believe in my time at council there certainly has been a way increased focus on health and safety right throughout, and yeah, it's much appreciated.
Thank you for that feedback, and that's a result of the support of the team, including the team at this table, so that's much appreciated.
Thank you. Any
Dug out of the hole.
Sorry?
Well dug out of the hole.
Couple of questions I have, right? And maybe it's for future discussion. What I'm really keen to see, this is the journey, it's a journey, not a destination, is what I'm really keen to see is what are your top 5 risks? Where are you on those top 5? And, you know, what's next? I think that would be, to focus this committee on gaining assurance that health, safety and wellbeing is alive and well. And one of my top 5 risks is on page 16 of the agenda, item 2.1.3. It's those jolly contractors you employ from time to time. And they, to me, often create a whole lot of risk because you're relying on their health and safety processes. And the question I have is, what's the process for council to actually review those processes? And it'll be nice if you are doing it to actually receive some feedback as part of your report. Do you want to comment on that, Sharon?
Yeah, absolutely. as you very correctly say, it is a journey. That journey is becoming far more rapid now. In terms of our top 5 risks, one of the projects we're currently working on is our health, safety and wellbeing risk framework, which is going to identify precisely that. I could tell you anecdotally what I think they are, but this journey will tell you what they are and what the controls are and really how we're monitoring them. So I expect in the next for the next risk and assurance committee, I'll be telling you exactly what they are. And yes, for the contractor safety processes, that is one of the initiatives and one of the projects we've got that we're working on. And that is really ensuring that our contract managers have the training and support to manage our contractors well.
Yeah, so just from an operational perspective, we do subscribe to, is it Safe
Plus.
Yep. Which is a process. I think what we've now got is a person in place that can audit some of that. We haven't had that until Matt's arrival. So that is all part of it.
I was looking at Matt and I was expecting that to be part of Matt's job. Welcome, Matt. Mayor Andy.
Anybody working on our networks has to be an approved contractor. It's part of the approval contract status to have a health and safety position.
Yeah.
And that's the avenue to be able to refine that.
Well, I think the issue for me is, like, I don't disagree with that, right? But I have been aware of people say we've got all this in place. Here's all our paperwork. But the reality is they're not actually following their own paperwork. And that, to me, and we've got an obligation under the Act to make sure that they are actually following the process. There have been a number of Auckland cases with the rubbish truck that actually the council didn't follow up, and the council were then joined as part of the settlement process. That, to me, and it's not nice when someone loses their life, but the fact that council potentially could have played an active role in potentially mitigating.
And that's why we've placed importance on not only having Safe Plus, which is the qualified auditor program, but also providing more support to our contract managers to ensure that they're actually doing the safety checks to ensure that those processes that they say they do are being done.
I just note, and this is more just probably a question around the security of the types of events we're having. So 8 events in February is a significant jump. And I note on the pie graph that we've gone in abusive behaviour from 3 to 9, which would suggest that 6 of those events were abusive behaviour style events. Are we seeing an increase from the community on those abusive events towards staff? And are we comfortable that we've got the right mechanisms in place to protect the staff?
So there's certainly been an increase in reported events. It could be both that we are seeing an increase in the amount of abusive behaviour events, combined with the fact that more events are being reported, and that's largely due to a lot of the work that Matt has been undertaking and really getting out into the field and into our community centres and really encouraging reporting. We never want those kind of events to occur, but what's pleasing in terms of looking at the actual event reports and event investigations is that in every case staff acted appropriately by either de-escalating the situation, which we do provide that de-escalation training, or involving the police in doing it promptly. So the events were responded to correctly. That obviously doesn't stop the fact that they are happening, and we're definitely looking at any other preventative options that we can have rather than reactionary options.
Yeah, I think to support further Sharon's or answering your question, Councillor, what we have had as an organisation was an acceptance that abusive behaviour was just part of the job, and we've been active in saying no, it's not. And so this is refreshing in that our people are now accepting that it's not part of the job, that it can be. It also gives us the data that allows the team to focus on the appropriate training. In this case, Sharon's been talking about de-escalation training, our relationships with the police, making sure we have processes in place, including trespassing, including panic alarms, and all those things are valid, tested, have standard operating procedures associated with them, etc. And so this puts it at a priority that if it's happening so often, we should have these things in place and have that resource dedicated to it. And its justification, yeah.
Sad. Very. Basically, don't know what the cause was, but I see there's someone in authority, right, with trying to do their job is considered fair game by a lot of people. Right, thank you, Sharon. Now, is there any comment on our health, safety and wellbeing diligence? We're just quite happy to, at this stage, are we going to endorse it without an amendment, or are there any amendments proposed? I've got none. None, right. So, Councillor Fee, can I get you then to move the recommendations?
Happy to do that.
That's part of your role, in inverted commas, right? I've got a mover. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. Thank you, Sharon. Next item, privacy update, depending on which school you went to. Thanks, guys. That's item 10.1, page 28. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would like to speak to this item and provide a verbal update. So this is the first time the privacy update has been presented to this committee, and it will become a regular item that I present every quarter. So at the time that I wrote this agenda item, there were no known privacy breaches to report. However, yesterday I did become aware of a minor privacy breach, so I'd like to provide a verbal update on that now. So it occurred on Monday this week, and in my assessment as the privacy officer, it is a minor breach and no significant harm has been caused or is likely to be caused. Obviously, in the interest of privacy, I'm going to describe what happened in fairly general terms without identifying the names of any staff or the names of any community members. So we had a situation where two neighbouring properties both have a similar feature that requires a compliance inspection check. So we'll call those property A and property B, and they're right next door to each other. So the inspection report for property B was hand delivered to property A owners, and that was done completely in error, an innocent error. The entrance to the properties are really close, and the staff member thought they were at property B. So the owners of property A only realised that the documentation related to their neighbouring property after the staff member had left, and it was quite reasonable that they missed it given that they had exactly the same feature on their property. So property A owners spoke to property B owners, let them know what had happened, and then they returned the documentation to council. So property B's been contacted by council with an apology, and property owners for property A have been thanked for returning the documentation. So a conversation's taken place with the staff concerned around privacy matters, and look, to their absolute credit, as soon as they found out about the error, they did the right thing. They informed me in my capacity as privacy officer, and they acted entirely appropriately in terms of contacting both property owners to resolve the matter. So in my view, no serious harm has occurred or is likely to occur. The information that was released to property A about property B was only their name, which was already known. The neighbours know each other, and the owners of property B haven't expressed any concern or distress whatsoever. And the documents were returned to council with an assurance that no copies had been made. So acknowledging this is obviously a verbal update, it was only brought to my attention yesterday. I am happy to include it in the next written privacy update if that would be reviewed.
Let's just just in terms of closing the loop, that would be appropriate. And thank you for your update. Any questions?
Yeah, I just wonder if it needed actually to come to us, to be honest, that we should have a protocol around significance. You know, and the reason I say that is because if you have a protocol around significance, then significance must be reported.
If I may respond to that, there's really two types of privacy breaches. One is the minor breach, which I've just reported to you. The other type of breach is a notifiable breach, and I've outlined that in the report, and it's also outlined in the policy, which is attached to the report. So there are some breaches where, due to the nature of the harm, it's notified to the Privacy Commission.
So it's in the policy that if there is more substantial breach, then it must be reported. That's what I'd see as that's the threshold.
Yeah.
Sorry, and through you, Chair, and just to that, Mayor Andy, I think the bigger thing is here is that there is a policy in place that has been acted, and there's a degree of confidence, comfort from the staff to have seen it, action's been taken. I think that's the level. Whilst it's a small breach, I think that's, to me, what brings the document isn't just something that's collecting dust on the shelf. Like all these things, they're policies that have been lived and breathed, and I think that's a degree of comfort that.
Totally agree with that. No problem with that at all. But just in terms of minor breaches, I'm not sure we need to know all the details.
I don't think we need to, I agree we don't need to know the detail, but just in terms of, I like the fact that it's been brought to this committee gives us assurance that there is a process and that process is being followed. And I think maybe that's a discussion we had is, how that would be actually formally reported. And say is formally reported that there was a minor breach, it was over property issues, and it was deemed minor. That's in the formal report, and then if there's any questions, I think that's probably as much, whereas you've got various degrees depending on the severity, you'd then probably potentially want to even move it into public excluded because of the risk of personal identification. Comfortable with that? Yeah. Question? Yeah. So question I have is, it's the chief executives, right? This is another, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong, but in terms of what's the impact of additional resources, and are you comfortable if you've got the resources in the organisation to comply with the Act?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah. For me, Mr. Chair, this is part of what we do and how we do it. I don't see we require additional resources. What we require is the appropriate level of vigilance, training, and support. And in this case, I rang the officer involved as soon as I found out to thank the person for the way in which they contacted our privacy officer, the way in which they disclosed it. And it's really about our culture as an organisation to support people that when mistakes are made, I say when, not if, that we support them to put their hand up. And it was an excellent example, I think, of both courage and the application of our processes and our culture.
That's important, because to make a stand up for the person who never made a mistake. No? Yeah. But the problem we've got, and it goes back to that health and safety and well-being, we are expected, bizarrely enough, never to make a mistake, particularly by the media.
If I may respond to that, I have a view which is on health safety, that we are probably vigilant for 55 minutes out of 60. And we should focus our attention on that, how we support people to be in that 5-minute window. Have we wrapped around them enough cotton wool, be it for mental health or physical health, that in that act of lack of vigilance, which happens to everybody, be it an air traffic controller or a surgeon or whatever, that we've got appropriate protocols and training, etc., in place in that environment. And so we accept that things do happen. It's how we have mitigating measures in place.
Yeah. All right, thank you for that. I'm happy that we just note the recommendation as it is in the order paper. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Next item, page 39, the disclosures update. Right, yeah,
This one I'll just take as read, noting that there's nothing to report.
nothing to report.
Through the chair, may I just make ask a question about both of these, those protected disclosures and the privacy, and they're both significant policies. Do they get, I know we review them from time to time and you do, but do they get a legal review at any stage to make sure that we're ticking all the right boxes? Is that?
Yeah. And that's happened with both of our current updates to the policy. Our legal team have reviewed them. External legal counsel.
External legal team to review. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So you're prepared to move the recommendation on page 39, are you, councillor?
Happy to move, yes.
Do I have a seconder? Mayor Andy, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you, Sharon. Are you staying or are you leaving us? Thank you. I might want to talk to you about another matter after the meeting, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Nothing to do with this council, no? Cheap legal advice. No, I'm only joking. Right. Next item, 10.3, internal audit program.
Thank you very much. And this is just a standing paper just to show the committee what we're doing with our available resources regarding internal audit programs. Page 41's got the 5-year plan in inverted commas. Second column is 22-23. And just want to point out that there's 3 ticks there. The cybersecurity awareness, we've got an external review currently on site conducting that. The cover paper talks about the LINS audit for consenting applications has been completed. And once the annual report's out of the way, we're hoping that Gerard will have time to look at the anti-fraud assessment, dovetailing with cash handling procedures. So it's really not to be, just no decision made, just put it out there for anyone who wants to add comments and just so you can see that we are doing stuff.
Any questions from committee or those elected members present? You're not going to like me, Dave. Right? The question I have is, we've got our risk framework, later in the agenda. When would we then be looking at what are our major risks that we actually rely on, and should that, relying on the controls, and should that actually be then revamping our internal control program?
Yes. Fair question. So the way the risk framework's being developed is we've got the risk management strategy.
Yep.
We've got the strategic risk register, as you see in the agenda, is being reformatted and expanded. We're closing in on having a risk appetite and tolerance policy. Once we've got the framework at a more completed stage, then we'll be looking at how that dovetails into other areas, such as the risk program.
So we noticed that it was March 21, which is a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I just wonder when we actually have a bit more deep dive into our internal audit work program. That's where I'm heading.
The purpose of this is really just to flag that.
Okay.
Do you want to? Does the committee want to?
Yeah, committee. Mayor Andy?
Yeah, I've got some comments that I was going to make in regard to this in terms of the Risk and Assurance Committee work program, because the two are linked together.
Yeah.
And so perhaps when we get onto that item, I will talk in a little bit more in detail.
I'm just with the events of earlier in the year, one of our internal control and things we're going to be looking at is business continuity planning. And I wonder whether we might want to bring that review forward, considering some lessons learnt or potential lessons observed of Hawke's Bay, where there was significant power outage, cell phone tower outage. What does it actually mean? Everyone now is relying on these beasts to communicate, and if these beasts are no longer working, how do we actually function as a council? There's, for example, I know Wairoa's a bit isolated, but are there parts of this community that could be a Wairoa that council that can't, find out what's happening? Is that actually an issue going forward?
So just to clarify, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you're suggesting that we should conduct a scenario where there's a significant event and their response.
No, I'm not. I'm saying my question, maybe this later on the agenda, is, how are we testing our business continuity planning against potential events that are now becoming more common?
Maybe if I could, if I look at page 41 and the table on page 41, you'll see business continuity was something that we reviewed internally and overview in 21-22 year. Have I understood you correctly that your perhaps your recommendation from the committee might be for us to look at that? Currently, it's on 24-25 that we should accelerate that.
Yeah, just looking for some feedback.
Yeah.
Is to say, what's happened up north on the East Coast. Is there anything that we need to take away from those learnings from a business continuity planning? And Councillor Andy. Mayor Andy.
That's right. There's going to be a series of reports that come out of the cyclone, and there'll be reports in terms of, for instance, Vodafone and those communication will be doing their own analysis. They will all be in the public arena. We've been promised that, really. And there'll be significant lessons to be learned. But I think that we target those reports and say, once they're out, how could we have been?
I hear you. I'm just very nervous about sometimes how long those reports take to come out.
The alternative is that you engage a series of consultants, and that's what I'd be nervous around.
I'm not asking a series of consultants. What I'm potentially asking is the chief executive to say, is there anything that we've got that we know now, that in terms of our business continuity planning, that needs to be updated as a result of what's happened? It's probably at that very, very high level issue, as it's quick, not navel gaze, but more than that, saying, is there anything in our business continuity planning that we could actually, that we're relying on, that may or may not work as a result of the learnings of the events earlier in this year? That's all I'm really asking.
If that's addressed to me, I think I would probably also taking what His Worship has said, many of the reviews that we've had to date have been on the operational response from a civil defence perspective. And a lot of the learnings are coming out of that. So that's also council's function. So you could argue that is a business continuity, which is how we operate as an emergency operations centre and contribute to a wider a group response. Maybe I'll carry on talking, but maybe if I could ask Sharon, who's one of our controllers, to comment a little bit further in a minute. I would be more comfortable, and I see there's a reflection on page 59. I would be comfortable to accelerate what we've currently got on that table on page 41 under business continuity, to put that into next year, being 23-24 year, because that will be the point we'll start actually having some data around the other business continuity, which we typically look at as comms and our ability to perform our legislative function. Which is, I think, where you're going.
That's exactly where I'm going. But my question is, as we go through this process, right, I don't really want to say, oh yeah, we knew that, but we're waiting for the review. That's all I'm concerned about, Mr. Chief Executive, right? That, you know, that we know something. So let's make sure that we're actually capturing that as we know it.
Perhaps if Sharon could talk about the lessons that we have learned from an operational response from the EOC.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And I guess, you know, what I'd add in summary is that there's two parts to the response and two parts to the learnings. And in terms of things we have to consider, it's from a civil defence perspective, can we respond to the event? And do we have the capability and capacity to sustain a long response in a significant event across the entire district? And the second part of that is, at the same time, we need to keep council operating. And so our business continuity plans really focus on identifying what are the essential services that we must keep running during an emergency event, knowing that legislatively we have to respond to the event and we have to keep essential services running to their fullest possible extent. So, the lessons learned will be applied in terms of, you know, ensuring that we do have that split identified and that we do have teams able to sustain both of those responses for the long term. But that's, you know, that's what our continuity plans have been designed around.
Yeah. So we have a business continuity risk, which I refer to as page 59. That is unchanged effectively. I think the business continuity plans is where we're targeting here.
Okay. I think my view is I would probably bring that forward to 23-24 would be my recommendation.
Yes, and I would happily accept that.
Yeah.
If that, excuse me, sorry,
Yes.
if that could be as an undertaking. Thank you.
Something else might have to drop off as a result.
Yes.
And I think that's for you to come back as the next report as well. You know, we're bringing this forward. What do we actually potentially drop off or push further out?
That's the issue.
Absolutely, and to me, this is the discussion we should be having. If we're asking the chief executive to do something, you know, he's got a committed workforce. What's the consequence? We can't do everything within existing resources. Right. So we've got a recommendation there. Can I suggest that we actually, they're just noting the change to the business continuity planning review time frame. We actually won't specify what it is.
Yeah. Can I, for business continuity planning?
Yeah.
Can I just add, given lessons learned from Cycle and Gabrielle?
Yeah, I'm just saying this. We just review, right? So to me, that actually then allows the GU to bring back at next meeting as part of the actions. Is look, I think we could. The reports are going to be due. Well, 3 months, right? Are going to be reported now in late 2024. Some of these will be brought forward in 2023. So that enables you to actually have an informed program.
Yeah.
Without actually tying yourself up in knots.
Yep, that's clear, thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? I think Councillor Fee got in by a pen. All those in, no further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Next item, 10.4. Dave again.
Yeah, again, this is
Yep.
Sorry, Chair. Just a report that comes to the committee every time, just for you to oversee what comes to you and anything you want to add in or take out.
Yep. Mayor Andy.
Yeah, I have a number of comments to make around this, and it also relates to 10.5 and 10.4, very closely related in nature. And I'm not saying we don't do any of this, because that's all important. But what I'm also suggesting that this report could or should include how we possibly, at chair discretion, and I'll talk about that, review the major council decisions involvement. For instance, we're going through road and procurement. We have shared services. We have the Rail Hub Board.
Yep.
We have, you could take any one of the major items in the PMO reports, and there should be a flag to say that anything could be dropped into this discussion. So, for instance, if Dave, as a chair of assets, came to you and said, I'm a little bit nervous around a particular work program or PMO process, it needs to have a process in which that could be focused on in this agenda or a subsequent agenda. Because all of the other things are routine things that we do, but we also have to pick up where there is a potential for an area within our capital works program. Certainly we have some risks around road and procurement, shared services, all of those. But if they're not flagged as a possible list or process to get them in, where do they fit? Sorry, I may not have explained this really well, but
yeah, and I understand where you're coming from, because in everything we do, there is an element of risk, and the question is, I think what you're saying is, what is the role of this committee? And maybe you're also saying, what's my role as independent chair to actually be involved in some of those high-level risk issues, for want of a better word. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, and that's why I've said at chair discretion. So as the chair, you have the ability to overlook all of council, but you also have the ability for someone to come to you and say, hey, I am a little bit concerned about this, and say, I've had a look at this, appreciate your concern, and it should be on the table for discussion.
And to be honest, I actually welcome those discussions from other elected members. So look, I think there is a risk here which may not have been adequately considered. Right? What is your considered opinion, maybe not advice, right? On terms of the way forward, whether it should actually be then referred to risk insurance, or do we actually deal with it as part of council normal business and actually flag the risks through the committee process? No, I don't want to be bringing everything back to this committee, otherwise we're going to drown in the swamp. And we only meet 4 times a year, so that's the last thing we want to happen. So I've got to wait for that for the Risk and Insurance Committee meeting to actually to make. So how do we actually have that in an efficient discussion?
Through you, Chair, if I may, previous audit risk or risk and assurance meeting, and it may have been in the last training before your time as chairing, we did make a decision that when reporting through to General Council on which we've got about 10 key projects, I suppose, that we work through in our assets and infrastructure, and which flows through into council, we take those back and we overlay the specific risks that they come through out of our risk register. And I think I do tend to agree with Mayor Andy on that, particularly the item on page 55, and if we look at the capital program folders, if you overlaid that over a number of our programs that we've got at the moment, there's risks through 90% of it, through a large number of things. So I do tend to agree with Mayor Andy on this one. How do we get that in a little bit more depth if we take that to that next level? Should it just be through our Assets and Infrastructure Committee or our General Council Committee when we're looking at those to get that overlay of the risk which we have a risk indicator at that level, but sometimes there's maybe a little bit more sitting underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with, what's the role of risk insurance in, and I don't refer to capital projects, I refer to any project. And my view is that, and there is, as part of the committee, the Audit and Risk Insurance, that maybe we actually get a bit of a, I would call a deep dive into some of the projects to say, as a learning for both the committee and council, this is the risk we have identified and this is the way we have mitigated it, is one answer. But that's not necessarily before a decision is made. It's sort of part of that gaining that assurance that risks have been identified. But maybe it's also saying is, we've got this project coming up that, let's be, yes, it wasn't open, right? It was in Stratford yesterday. Right? They've opened a new swimming pool. Well, should have the risks around opening of that new swimming pool come to risk and assurance well before it was opened, a little bit of a report saying these are the risks we have identified and these are the way we're going to do it. I don't know, I'm just putting that as an idea, as sort of a forward program, and then that, and I wouldn't be doing that for every single capital project, which, as I said, we're going to drown in the swamp.
That's the issue. That's why I put in at the chair's discretion, because you don't want this committee to be bogged down in operational detail, nor do you want it to become the go-to for a disgruntled councillor or mayor. Seeking redress or whatever. But somewhere, I believe there should be a process, and I tend to reflect on what my chair of assets has said, that maybe the referral could come from assets to say, hey, this needs a deeper look at. I don't come to this with the answer, but I'm seeking wisdom.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers either, and I think this is actually working about through council process. And I just before I comment, one of the things I'm really keen to see, right, and it worked really well with Wairoa, a couple of the last LTP, they traditionally have missed the boat on LTPs and annual reports. So the was audit and risk back then. I insisted as a member that we actually see a report on each committee agenda, and they meet every 2 months. The timeline for the LTP and what are the critical risks associated with the LTP to ensure they're being managed. So that to me is the template that I actually like to see. So for example, if you've got a major procurement for roading, that we've got this procurement happening for roading, we know in advance what are the major risks, right? And how are they being identified? And to me, this is about major projects, not about resetting a road, because you do that every day of the week. Now, I would anticipate that the council should only have between 5 and 10 major projects in any one year. If you've got more than that, they're more than major.
I also had in my list, Three Waters. I also had the bridges at Hautapu Park. I had the consenting around wastewater, Marton pools, etc. And I'm not for a second saying that we should take on all of those, but we should at least be aware that they are happening and have the opportunity at discretion to say, for instance, if I go to the procurement, the procurement process that is going to be used has almost semi been adopted outside of council in terms of process. And We need a system where we can say, hang on, where are the risks? I don't know, Peter's probably looking at me saying, what planet is he on? But perhaps the chief executive may want to give a view.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, I'm pleased actually to report, Your Worship, that we are indeed on the same planet on this one.
But same paper, same planet.
And the same page, and conveniently sitting next to each other. But, I think it is the will of our staff to bring to our governors risk and issues that are relevant to your attention and how we intend to mitigate them. That's one of our core roles, and I believe that there is a good level of trust between my staff and governors on that issue, that we bring to you relevant issues. We don't try and cover anything up. And I would welcome the opportunity to bring to you, either at the discretion of the chair or others, or at our discretion, projects which we feel would benefit from an audience with the committee, and testing that the mitigating measures we've implemented are appropriate in the eyes of governors. And for those of you who may have seen me write a wee note for Mayor Andy, I think that the consenting that we are working on particularly for our Bulls and Marton wastewater treatment plants. Mayor Andy and I met with Horizons this week, and it is a critical path item, and so that would be something that I'd be happy to bring to the next committee meeting if that's of interest. So I think, Your Worship, we're a lot aligned.
Yeah, and we will have an item around consenting to come to council with regard to one of our small towns. So they will have a risk profile for a council decision.
Well, I'd like to confer with the Mayor that as a new councillor in a governance role, applying governance, I would feel comfortable if I could approach you, the Chair, for example, if I have concerns about risk or how do I manage this, or is this risky? I feel as though there are some huge decisions to be made over the next 2 or 3 years for this council, with some huge projects that, as a collective, provides risk. I would encourage an open sort of dialogue between you, the Chair, and or the ability for councillors, for example, to talk to you about their concerns, for example. And how would you go about that? I've been thinking the same thing. I've cited several times my concern about debt levels or potential debt levels, and also the capacity of council staff to do the job that's in front of them, which is, I can see, has been quite large.
Maybe we can develop some protocols, and I'm very happy for that, right? But I think it needs to, right? There needs to probably be a trifecta of how we, right? And look, I appreciate your comments there. And I think, just off the top of my head, what I would appreciate, the way I work, right? You getting on the phone, I'm not always available. I could be sitting in another meeting, right? And maybe a quick email to say, I've got these concerns over this risk, right? And I wish to talk to you about this. That actually enables me to be also prepared as well for that phone call. And we'd set up a time to have that phone call. Maybe that's just one option. I think everyone's got access to my email address somewhere in the system, rather than just a random phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I probably wouldn't appreciate, and my wife wouldn't appreciate either. Any other comments, Mr. Chief Executive? Your Worship.
Sorry, Your Worship.
I'm with the register that's there. I have a couple of comments around particular items, but I think we're starting to think around the principles of this, so that's great.
If I could ask a question, Mr. Chair, and I wonder if the process is we bring our top projects via PMO reports to assets and infrastructure. And I wonder if the assets and infrastructure chair might ask us to particularly look at one from a deep dive risk perspective and almost refer it to audit and risk. As you talked about a procedure, but would that work? I'm testing it with you and other active members.
Yeah, I tend to support that as a principle.
Yeah.
I think we need to understand the significance of the project and where the project sits at any particular time.
Yes.
On the scale of where it's being done as to where any potential risks may get presented. And by having that looked at an assets and infrastructure level first, then we'd be able to determine the significance of it coming back to this committee. Or to delve into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Also, I don't see this necessarily just being capital projects as well. Right? So to me, one project, and might not be happening now, would be, say, for example, a district plan review, right? Where, it's going out the window if the new reforms go through. That's a significant project, so I would anticipate that might actually come to the Risk and Assurance Committee a couple of times during its review. LTP is another project. And it's not about the decision making, it's about what are the risks around this project. We might be doing community engagement on I don't know what, right? There might be some significant risks around that. And to me, it's about those significant risks and making sure that it's gaining assurance that those risks have been identified and they've been put. There is potential for mitigation if it was to turn to custard. I've got one question for Dave on this one too. When we finish this discussion, we might as well talk about as well. See if you can win another crunch. I haven't got anything today, Dave. I think so. If we did so, Mr. Chief Executive, what I suggest is you bring back a protocol for the next meeting on how we working with your other elected members and bring it back in terms of bringing something back for us to consider next meeting. Yeah. Or even if you want to have enough, discussion before then with me, we can do that as well. The question I have, and it's very close to my heart, top of page 45. Revenue and financing policies, right? Yeah. March each year, we're in March, right? And funnily enough, I have been asked by Tautura, who do the Strategic Finance Forum in April, to present on, as a chair of audit or risk and assurance committees, what sort of questions and what sort of things would I be looking for in a revenue and financing policy? And of course, my understanding is you've got to adopt your revenue and financing policy before you adopt your LTP. That's what the legislation says. So, just wonder why it was on this list.
No, it's a good point because it is reviewed as part of the annual plan. As you say, it's not kind of overhauled. It's just reviewed to see if there's any tweaks needed. And we have tweaks as in the funding mix on a couple of areas, but it's not been brought to this committee. It has been discussed at council and it's included in the consultation document, the results of the review. So you're right, there's an oversight not to bring that here.
It's all right. But again, to me, it's the issue for me is the policy is the policy. Unfortunately, for my sins, I only do 1 or 5 of these. I'm currently doing about 1 or 5. And I know if I was attacking council's rating policy, I would first of all attack the revenue and financing policy, just like the accommodation providers did in Auckland, about the process to make sure the process is actually robust. And there's been 1 or 2 changes, which I think Dave's now aware of as a result of a presentation last week. So it's about making sure that that's a robust policy. And I think the problem we've got is people are becoming very quick to go to court these days over Anything council does wrong. All right. Just, we've got on, and thing we haven't really talked about it, we have in terms of debt. On page 45, we've also talked about the proposed water reforms have created significant uncertainty. I think we're probably all aware of that. And it's a wait and see. If anyone's got a good crystal ball that works, can they let me know, please? Or can read the Prime Minister's mind before he's actually made it up. So we've got a recommendation there on page 45. Do we want to change any of those that recommendation, or we just it's in the action list today?
I think it's an action list, and it's something that I think perhaps you and Peter spend some time thinking about.
Okay, all right, we'll do that. So do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 45? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Fraud reporting, page 46. 10.5.
If I may, again, standing report that comes to council, comes to committee, just to show you, make you aware of current fraud stuff. And you'll notice from an earlier agenda item that we are scheduling some internal audit reviews to be conducted by staff. So
I'm happy just to receive this.
Okay, so you're going to move. Seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Strategic asset risk register, page 47, 10.6.
thank you, and I'll take the lead again if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you'll see from the attachment starting on page 48, we've completely revamped our strategic risk register. I personally believe it's a much better format. Page 49, I think, is a very good matrix that shows each of our strategic risks, their inherent risk and current mitigated risk, detailed in the following pages. I would like to point out the third from bottom one refers to obligations with health and safety are not met. And there's an oversight that the word well-being is not on that line. If you refer to page 60, the more detailed analysis, it shows that well-being is actually included. It's just not on the index. I'd just like to point that out before someone else did. Thank you.
Any comments? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly I agree with Mr. Toombs on this one. I think it's a good report. I think it does read very, very well. And I think what it does, which comes back to the earlier conversation we were having about risks and our capital programs and other things, it does draw your focus in to start to think about some of the things that you've got on and overlay that risk to it. So I would encourage reporting at our other meetings to reference back to this and to continue to do that. I think it's useful.
Councillor Fee, I can see you jumping a bit there.
I just, this was an area that we were pulled up on in our council mark.
Yep.
So awesome to see it being introduced.
I'm going to be mean and nasty. Can we go to, I should have actually noted the page number, the health and safety and wellbeing risk.
Page 60.
Thank you. And just talk about, and what I would like to do in future meetings is maybe pick on one of these and actually do a bit of a deep dive and saying is that, we've got, here's our obligations under health, safety and wellbeing are not being met, that's our risk. And to me is probably actually have some discussion as an example. And one of the things I'm a little confused over is at the moment we've got the inherent risk as being extreme because of the consequence. But then it moves to moderate. Now, my understanding is because the consequence to council has moved from significant to moderate. Is that the rationale? Or is it because the likelihood is also, was moved down from likely to possible as well? Can you explain that one to us? Sorry, Sharon, I should have warned you beforehand.
I mean, in terms of the matrix,
Yeah.
because there's been a change in both the likelihood and the consequence.
Yep.
And I guess what it's saying, and you might be able to correct me if I get the matrix details wrong, is that without any controls or any of the mitigations that we've put in to reduce that kind of risk, the likelihood is likely and the consequences are pretty dire, hence it being an extreme risk. But after we've applied our controls, they're sufficient to reduce the risk, acknowledging that there's some safety risks that are unacceptable, so must be eliminated. And our focus from a safety sense is on elimination rather than mitigation. Mitigation is not the preferred option because we'd rather eliminate the hazard, but it's not always possible.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
It does, right? And this is what I'm, so the issue for me is the consequence. So this is the bit I don't understand, right? What's the consequence that's being significant for council? See, the issue for me is, particularly with health and safety, is that the consequence of poor health and safety is well-being is we actually lose a life. Now, I don't want to sound morbid, but even with all the health and safety processes that are in place, there is still a small chance that they don't work, and therefore we do actually have a loss of life. So therefore, is it fair then, I understand the likelihood, with all the controls in place, you're reducing the likelihood, but do you actually reduce the consequence down to moderate? That's the question I'm asking.
So looking at the matrix, if we were to retain it as significant, it would mean the risk remained. Well, essentially went from extreme to high.
And is that, yeah. And that's the sort of debate that I would like to have in terms of a risk that we take one of these and it's highlighted, this is the one we're going to do actually a deep dive onto as part of our work program each quarter, just so we're actually understanding the risks and what other members think of that.
Yeah, well, the two things, not talking specific about this example, but if the committee would like to do a deeper dive on one, I just would ask for advance notice so we could...
No, you bring us, right, and maybe in discussion with, right, you say, look, this is one that we've actually done some work on, we would actually like to bring a deep dive, right?
Okay, so we front it.
Absolutely, this is, right, this is not putting people, right, throwing you under the bus. Councillor, you...
Yes, I'm just thinking about this in a slightly different context. And I think you raised a very, very good point. But particularly when you've raised that point on the health and safety one, which does have an extreme poor outcome potential. But if you can't put steps in place to change or mitigate your matrix by taking actions, i.e., for example, additional staff, which Sharon we've indicated has given us some different effects in our health and safety reporting. By your comment about this one with health and safety, and it can't always be we take every step, therefore you wouldn't be able to moderate or change any of your other actions, or you'd have difficulty in doing so. On your risk matrix would always remain very much some of the health and safety ones, quite an extreme one. But when you look at other actions that you try to do to mitigate your risk, it becomes very difficult to move some of those things if we sit there and go, well, you're never going to mitigate all. So I just...
Yeah, and that's the debate we want, potentially to... And to me, I've deliberately been provocative here with the health and safety one, because generally, in my experience, it's hard to move both consequence and likelihood. And to me this is where council's the next item. No, one down. It's your appetite and tolerance policy as well. to say how much do we actually try and mitigate risk, and are we actually too risk averse? Now, health and safety, we've agreed, we just can't, having a serious injury is a no-go. But unfortunately, there's been one or two councils that have actually lost staff members in a workplace accident. And whether they could have been prevented, I don't know. I haven't actually investigated that. It's not when a staff member is lost, it's not a pleasant experience for anybody.
If I may, just continuing that theme, on page 58 is a good example, I think, where we've got a risk matrix where climate change responsiveness is ineffective, inherent risk is high, it goes to a moderate, and then the table underneath that, we've got our future additional, we're prepared to accept a moderate level of risk. So this isn't about minimising risk everywhere.
Yeah.
It's about settling on a risk assessment that you're comfortable with.
So what you're proposing is that we actually look at climate change next time, are you? I'm just
No, not at all. I'll just pick anyone that's not mine.
Oh! At least he's honest.
That's exactly, that's what I was going to say.
So just to confirm, you prefer one of us or ELT to come back and say this is the one we've nominated for a deep dive. Yeah, so ELT will have that discussion.
And we can actually have a discussion as part of, let's look at the next one next time, right? So we're not actually, so everyone is coming, so that also the committee members are also thinking about it as well.
Can you excuse me just a minute?
Yeah, sure. Any other comments on this? I actually like where we're going with this, and my comment here is risk is a journey, not a destination. And I think this is a very good step on the journey. What I would be keen, and it's completely off the, well, it's not off the agenda, what I would be really keen, and maybe it's part of the 10.8, is we actually have got a bit of a journey step of where we are heading in terms of our risk management journey. This is a really good step, but what's next after this, Mr. Chief Executive? It might be 2 or 3 years away, but this is where we want to get to. And this is our level of maturity in terms of our risk appetite, risk policy, and this is where we are now. This is where we want to get to, but we don't want to be having we're not flying aeroplanes or something like that where you've got a different risk process. You're not a bank, therefore your financial controls are not necessarily as tight as a bank, etc. So, where are we in terms of that risk maturity level? We're low at the moment or medium. We'll only want to get to high, not super high or something like that. There are a number of tools available to make that assessment. And you've probably already got it. Dave's probably got it in his head where he wants to be, but it's actually bringing that back to the committee.
Yeah, I'm on page 47 of the agenda, section 3.1, the third bullet point. It's a summary of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We can have a more detailed time frames on them,
Okay. So just to be a pain in the butt, do you actually, in terms of that health and safety one, going back to page 60, we in light of what I said, do you think we should be changing?
Can I suggest that we use that as our first deep dive next time?
Yep, absolutely. Yep. I'm happy with that.
So ELT can talk about that maybe then.
Having heard, and maybe this is what we actually consider as the committee going forward, we might say, a committee member say, I'm actually not convinced about that risk level, then we actually the management then go away and prepare a deep dive for that one at the next committee meeting. All right, sounds like a very good idea, thank you. Any other comments on our strategic risk register report? So I'm happy to move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Fee. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Next item. Our summary management reports.
Thank you. I'm happy to talk to this. So a more detailed version of this is reported obviously to Fees, Excellence, Finance and Performance Committee. This just gives this committee an overview of where we are for the independent set of eyes. And if I could just refer to page 64, which is the whole of council summary. The fourth column in from the right is the year-to-date percentage variance, and we all know that year-to-date variances can disguise various things, but I think, Chair, with your accounting background, you'll see in total expenses, for example, many councils would love to have them size variances after 7 months. It's a pleasing year-to-date summary, I would say.
Possibly from
0.7% out on other expenses and personnel costs. Fine, pleasing.
pleasing. I'm actually, to be honest, right, I'm more worried about the ability of councils to deliver their CapEx program. No? Yeah. But you said, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to belittle. That's actually a pretty good result, right? Just very disappointed your depreciation is 9% out.
Over evaluation.
I know, I'm only winding you up on that
Oh,
one.
you mentioned depreciation.
I know.
Although I wasn't going to comment. But percentages are one thing, but you look at a 41% increase, for instance, in interest, you're talking something that is outside our control, but in terms of the total effect on council budgets, it's a small sum.
It's a very small sum, absolutely.
So, but you tend to focus on the percentage, and it draws your eye.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's not an enormous figure.
No, sense of, actually, that's actually, par for the course, what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
No one anticipated the level, when we were doing our budgets.
And I shouldn't
Last
be
year.
little debt because it is important, but
Yeah.
but
To me, the issue is, it's how do you manage that variance, or what's the consequence of that variance, rather than the variance has happened. No, good. I mean, we're not a finance committee, therefore I don't propose to debate it in any great degree.
I mean, I'm happy just to receive this.
Right, you've moved. Do I have a second? You've got a question, or you
Happy to second.
second? All those in favour, please say aye.
Couldn't have jumped in the head of the chair of finance.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know, she should have moved, yeah, it's all right. I'm pleased she seconded
Under
it,
pressure
right.
here today.
Sorry?
Under pressure here today.
Yeah, right. All those in favour, please say aye. You carried. Next item, 10.8, page 68. David again.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a policy that we've referred to in previous meetings, but I think this is the first time we've brought a draft to the committee. So it's probably going to be a policy that not everyone's familiar with, the content or format of it. And there is no one, well, in my opinion, there's no one right format. I've done a bit of research via Ms. Google, and come up with this format that ELT are quite comfortable with. And if I can just use as an example, page 74 of the agenda, we've got a range of risks that we have a risk appetite and risk tolerance for. We put some context around it, and where I like this is it's got some examples of what we will tolerate and not tolerate. So there are some stuff we're going to tolerate because it's not practical not to tolerate them. So I'm hoping that the document is self-explanatory. Skipping back to page 71, there's a summary of our appetite for the various types of risk, and there's more detail in the following pages. So it's still work in progress. We've got a couple of them we still haven't 100% finished, and I think they're noted. Page 75, for example. So we're working through it and just sort of bring it to the committee for
So this is only for our information at this stage?
and comments, yeah.
And comment?
If there's anything you think should be in or out, or questions.
Yeah, council staff need to be conservative and they need to be risk adverse because they need to operate by the rules in effect. And I'm thinking of things like consenting and all sorts of things. However, council should be prepared in some circumstances to accept the level of risk, and that's the reality. And the consequences of never doing that are sometimes things just don't happen. And so that it is right that staff put a position to you saying, here are the dangers associated with that. Considering.
Yeah, I just was thinking when I was reading this, listening to your earlier comments, and you asked for comments when you started talking about going into the lines of the insurance. It would be very interesting to see how this overlays thinkings around a session on insurance, because it's very much in there, and that's only one part of where this, as a policy or as a risk statement, overlays many of the things that we've got to consider, including the previous document about risk assessment. The two go hand in hand and overlay everything that we need to do, and would need to be referenced back to for a decision making.
Yeah, and this is, I would say that occasionally council as a whole moves into some high risk appetite decisions. So, the question is going with your eyes wide open and knowing that you're having a high risk because the benefits are there.
Yeah.
And the question I have is, how does this help, council make those decisions, right? Because it's, I agree totally with Mayor Andy that when we're processing your consent, we've got to get 100% right, because the consequences are not good. But, when you're making a decision to do a project, you might actually be prepared to, look, we're prepared to take some risks to mitigate all these risks. It would mean that the project won't happen or will be unaffordable for the community. So then how do we have that discussion? That's the bit that, I'm struggling with personally, what's the process? Because I agree generally, as a general statement, we've got a pretty low appetite for risk. But how do then we have those exceptions?
If I might just refer back to the sections I referred to earlier about the bullet points of what we will tolerate and what we will not tolerate. I think that's a great starting point for showing.
Yeah, and that, to me, I do like that. But here at the moment, and what I'm reading is page 71, and maybe 71 might need some refinement.
Okay.
In terms of financial risk, I'm looking at page 79. For instance, one of the things that I think should happen is, for instance, say you have a budget holder and there is a risk associated with I don't know, doing a section of road or whatever. But it would be useful also to say, if this risk eventuates and it is twice as expensive as considered, then this is how we could accommodate it within our budget.
Yes.
How the budget could be reformed in terms of the budget holder. So, if it turns to the proverbial, these are the things that we can review.
Yeah, and I agree totally with you, right? Because sometimes you're saying I'm prepared to take this risk, knowing that I've got a plan A, plan B or C. And that, to me, that's part of your risk mitigation, is actually to identify not only the risk but potential mitigation should it actually happen. And that to me needs to be sort of weaved into here as well, because I agree. If you actually look at potential for efficiencies and cost savings, right, by taking more risk, you potentially will save more money. But then when it does, not every project will go according to plan. So then how do you manage when a project doesn't go to plan? And the question I have is, you save, say, $100,000 by taking more risk, and it's cost you 50 extra later on. Is that worth the risk or not? Or it costs you 150, it's not worth it. So that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Correct. And associated that you've got to make sure that plan B and plan C is achievable in terms of the time frame.
Yes. Yep.
So that you go through the element of risk and reach a decision, a point where you can say that risk is now this, it's translated into real cost.
Yep.
But option B, C, that could possibly drop out of a funding arrangement, that you haven't committed to option B and C as part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if I may just refer to page 79, under council will tolerate, the 5 bullet points there. The second bottom one is referring to the key principles of what we're talking about here. That we will consider, we will tolerate calculated risks, where we understand the implications of them, we've weighed up options, etc. So the key principles are embedded in that bullet point. Maybe not to the discussion extent you'd like.
Yeah, and I was focused on that page as well.
But we all take risks in every day, right? We cross the road and the truck's coming, well, we just walk a bit faster. That's the way we mitigate the risk rather than wait for the truck to go by, because we might be sitting on the other side of the road for quite some time. Any further discussion?
I quite like this document and where it's going. I think it's really important, and I hope it's sort of the whole council gets copies of it as it evolves. I think it's a good document to have in place and well known and understood.
Yeah, I agree. So the question I have is where to from here with this document?
Well, we'll finalise it, and then it'll be part of the overall risk management framework that ELT will certainly refer to regularly, and will come back to this committee every quarter if required.
Do we need to come back every quarter? Once it's in place? No, I would have said out on an annual basis would be probably sufficient. And basically, now when we bring it back, then you might want to bring some examples of how it's been applied, see if it's still working.
I'm ahead of you in the game there because we've got something that's coming to council with regard to an activity, and that would be a lovely case study of that.
Yep. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just a resolution. We're just receiving this as per the recommendation. I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Andy seconded it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
It's carried. Next item, 10.9. Our management letter update.
Thank you.
Or the lack thereof.
Yeah, yes, as previously noted, we've not had a management letter since the financial year 2021. But again, this isn't designed for committee members to go through and pull the responses apart. It's just to show that we are moving stuff along, albeit limited resources, and if they're beneficial, they obviously get prioritised accordingly.
Having heard that, I agree, but there's a couple of issues that I would
Yep. You'd like
is of interest.
Yes.
Because these are issues that audit have identified as actions required.
Yes.
And if I look at the monitoring of contractor performance, etc., I think that's relevant.
Yes.
You know, especially in our roading networks, etc. We're up for review of procurement processes, and we need to understand that. And again, further down, the review of procurement practice is very, very topical, especially with the roading procurement. That's how we've been advised to council. I have some sensitivity around that, and the chief executive and I have some similar views. But that's it from me.
We've got a slightly different question. We've got a whole lot of dates for 2023. And considering we're now we're now into April, how realistic are those dates to achieve all those by the end of the calendar year?
The dates would have been provided by the responsible officer for each of these.
Maybe next report, Dave, do you want to put some specific, be a bit more specific in terms of month, etc. Just put some realistic timeframes on it, I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That would be my only comment.
And can I just add to this? The management letter points the auditor's opinion of stuff. Just because an auditor says something is necessary and beneficial doesn't mean it is.
I totally concur with you on that one. And to me, I think that's really important that that officers, where they disagree with audit, that they bring it to this committee with the reason for their disagreement or difference of opinion. We debate that and we either agree with audit or we agree with staff. And if we agree with staff take no action and we note that we're prepared to take the risk accordingly.
Totally.
And I have done that a number of times in other committees where audit keep on harping on about that, saying we don't have the resources, we've got the appropriate mitigation in place, go away audit. And they eventually have. They say, the previous committee has already, we don't agree with you committee, but you've already said it, so we'll just raise it and forget about it. And I think that is inappropriate, that we've identified the risk and we're prepared to accept that risk.
Can I ask you a question around that?
So
Where you have done that, have you received a note on the following audit?
yes and no.
Because that's the risk, isn't it?
Well,
It becomes a little bit untidy.
It's untidy, but where we've actually had that discussion with the auditor, I tend to drop it because they've actually said, no, they've made the note in the next audit. We won't refer to this again as the council has already discussed this and is aware of the issue.
Thank you.
And just to further that, when we have that situation, we don't ask for permission to ignore their recommendation. It's our position that they don't have to agree with us.
All right. Of course, we've got no idea when we're going to receive the next one yet, do we? Right. We've got a recommendation. Do I have a mover? I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mayor Andy. All those in favour, please say aye. I think that comes to the end of the meeting, except for the verbal chair's report. One of the things, we've talked about it during the meeting, that's what it sort of is to me is, I think, the weather events of earlier this year, I think are a reminder for councils, particularly in the risk space. We are, I note that and the Esk Valley is the one that worries me. People say, oh, this was unanticipated, but when you actually go back to the newspapers of 1938, those of you who've seen the newspaper article, the same event occurred in 1938, or a very similar event. So that's the bit that worries me, that these events have occurred. And to me is, look, I don't like the fact that people are saying, oh, the council allowed all this development to happen here, therefore we should stop development. The problem is, you tell me somewhere that is actually safe in New Zealand from any hazard. We actually live in a quite hazardous environment. The challenge that I perceive is how do we actually identify those hazards and mitigate them where possible. That's what I'm going to say on that. But I'm not in favour of, I mean, how many towns in New Zealand are on floodplains, and how many towns in New Zealand would be flooded to the same degree as Napier and Hastings if they had that degree of rainfall. So, pardon?
Not only the rainfall, we sit in a volcanic
Yeah.
leeway.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
probably the worst place in the world to go and set up home.
Not only volcanic, we've got earthquake. How many areas, right? Let's abandon the South Island because of the Alpine fault potentially is going to go. Sorry. Getting a bit passionate here, sorry. We live in, and I'm not saying we couldn't have mitigated all those risks, but we live in a risky environment. And what I found interesting is that Hawke's Bay Regional Council had already started working on a 500-year stop banks, and where those stop banks were in place, but they weren't actually flooded. And the other thing too is I was reading another paper which talks about the top global risks. The top global risk is cost of living. What that's actually going to do. And I think we're actually starting to see that in New Zealand. That to me is the wealth divide is getting greater. And what does that actually mean for our community? The other one that I had, obviously this is the current 2-year top 10 natural disasters and extreme weather events. We know all about that. Economic confrontations, and that's happening. We know all about that. Failure to mitigate climate change, and the last the top 5 is erosion of social cohesion and social polarisation. I'll just leave those concluding thoughts with you. What does that actually mean for New Zealand? And I think we're seeing all those here.
Pre-COVID, the pandemic was also in that top 5. They had signalled pandemic as being very high risk for the world before COVID.
It's still in their top 10 for the next 10 years. All right, no further debate? No other business? Declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your spirited bidding.
Thank you very much.
I don't know. Turn of phrase, Mayor.
Harold, are we still need,